Please stand as you feel able for our act of recognition. Today, the 25th of January 2026, we are marking the Day of Mourning to acknowledge the Gadigal elders, past and present, upon whose lands the Pitt Street Uniting Church stands. This is the sovereign and unceded country of the Gadigal, the people of the grass tree. This country came into the church's possession by deceitful, murderous and immoral means. We acknowledge the continuing sovereignty of the Gadigal over this country and the rights and responsibilities of the Gadigal elders, past, present, to care for it according to the wisdom passed down for more than 4,000 generations. We give thanks for the ancestors who formed this land and gifted it to the Gadigal to care for. We commit ourselves to work and pray towards a more just settlement for all Indigenous people. Budjeri Gamarua, welcome to our worship today, whether you're here in person or online. We offer a warm welcome to any visitors or newcomers who are present with us today. And I particularly want to acknowledge any Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander people present with us today. Thank you for honouring us with your presence on this day of mourning. Each year, on the Sunday preceding the 26th of January, the Uniting Church gathers in truth-telling, lament and hope to mark the day of mourning. We do this as an expression of our commitment made in 2015, when the Assembly accepted a request from the Uniting Aboriginal and Islander Christian Congress for the whole church to pause and remember the ongoing impacts of invasion, dispossession and injustice for First Peoples. In 1994, the Uniting Church entered into covenant with Congress, a covenant that named the pain caused when the church failed to hear the wisdom, spirituality and leadership of First People, when the gospel was confused with colonising ways. Covenant commits us to a different path, shaped by humility, truth, justice, and life-giving relationship. You may experience this morning's service as disordered. Regular elements of our worship have been intentionally reordered. Grief and rituals of mourning have a tendency to disorientate. If that's your experience today, I invite you to embrace it. Also, please be aware that today is also about truth-telling and truth listening. It's not always easy to listen, and our history of colonisation is not always pleasant. Please take care of yourself during and following today's service. Creator Spirit, God of justice and peace, be with you all.
I begin by acknowledging the Gadigal people and their elders, past and present, the traditional custodians of the land on which we meet and pray, and any other First Peoples here today, recognising your continuing connection to country, land, waters, ecosystems, and community. I believe we are all on a journey, asking ourselves, who are we in this place we call Australia? We carry different histories and emotions, but I hope we are all moving toward deeper understanding. As Liz said, today's reflection references traumatic events, including violence. Please take care of yourself and step outside if you need, and talk to someone afterwards if you need to. In the 1990s, a sign was placed in a park. The park is in Ashbury. It's called Peace Park. It's a much-loved local space for my family and others. The sign is titled Canterbury Vale, 1793. It marks the northern boundary of the first land grant in the area, 100 acres to the Reverend Richard Johnson, chaplain of the First Fleet. He established a sheep farm and named it after the headquarters of the Church of England, thus explaining how the municipality came to be called Canterbury. It's as though the place had no name or meaning until this time. The sign says nothing about the Darug people who lived here, how they understood and cared for this land, nor what happened when settlers arrived without warning. Public history assumes a we, our pioneers, our settlers, while the Aboriginal presence is rendered invisible. Recently, the Canterbury Council approved an additional sign acknowledging the Darug people. It's a small but important act of truth-telling. This local story opens into a much larger set of questions about colonisation in Australia. Political scholar Elizabeth Strakosch reminds us that in countries like Australia, invasion is not simply an event in the past, but a structure that continues through institutions and systems. First Peoples experience this daily. Settlers, or whatever we choose to call ourselves, are far less likely to see it. European colonisation emerged alongside Enlightenment ideas of liberal democracy, ideas about individual rights, property ownership, freedom, and equality. This raises a difficult question. How could these ideals be held at the same time as colonial oppression? Governor Lachlan Macquarie is often praised for being liberal and egalitarian, the father of Australia. He encouraged former convicts to become prominent citizens and granted them land. They would become absorbed into a new egalitarian society. Cultivating land became a marker of civilization. But there was a blind spot. Where did the land come from? Many settlers convinced themselves that the land was empty or unused, and that Aboriginal people possessed nothing of value. A sense of racial and moral superiority, often justified theologically, prevailed. Yet for those who have eyes to see, Aboriginal peoples have systems of seeing and knowing, of loving and living in intimate connection with this country, which they had sustained for over 60,000 years. As farming spread onto Aboriginal land taken without consent or treaty, there was conflict and it was escalating. In 1816, Governor Macquarie ordered a military campaign to, quote, strike terror into Aboriginal communities, leading to the Appin Massacre. In the early hours of 17th of April 1816, soldiers on horseback attacked a sleeping group of Aboriginal people, including women and children, near Appin. Officially, at least 14 were killed, though it is likely that there were many more. Some were shot, others driven over a steep gorge. 3 men's bodies were hung in trees, quote, in order to strike the greater terror into the survivors. Their heads were severed and later sent to the University of Edinburgh. 2 women and 3 children were taken prisoner. The children sent to the colony's orphan school. The massacre marked a turning point, leading to further restrictive controls and further frontier violence. I had not learned this history at school. I only became aware of Appin after my daughter, who had watched the SBS series The Australian Wars, called to ask me, where were our forebears? I discovered that in 1816, some of our ancestors were living on that land near Appin. Accounts from Gawain, Bodkin Andrews and other Darawal descendants of the survivors named these forebears as being among a group of settlers who had achieved a level of peaceful coexistence until the trauma of the massacre shattered that fragile balance. I hold both comfort and sorrow in this knowledge and feel called to a peaceful vision for Australia. Members of my family have since connected with a group called the Winga-Miami Reconciliation Group, which since the early 2000s has been holding an annual memorial open to all, focused on healing, remembrance, and living culture. Now, whether or not we have forebears who were there at that time, and whether or not they had acted justly, or whether they had pulled the trigger, or whether they arrived from other places more recently, I know I am a beneficiary of what colonisation has made possible. I have learned that liberal democracy governs through both freedom and unfreedom. In the 1970s, I lived in Armidale as a student, a world of opportunity, security, and freedom. In hindsight, I do not recall encountering a single Aboriginal person in that space. Then a few years later, I returned in the role of probation officer. This was another Armidale, where young Aboriginal people were disproportionately caught up in the justice system. Much of their behaviour was no different from that of middle-class youth, but it occurred in public spaces without the buffer of resources or private legal support. Repeated minor offences too often led to custody with devastating consequences. In my role, I could sometimes divert people from harm, but not always. I recall the shocking news. One young Aboriginal local man had died in custody. His body returned to his family for burial. I was only beginning to glimpse the depth of intergenerational trauma in that community. And the justice system is only one structure urgently in need of reform. While working in Armidale, I met Auntie Elva Taylor, a proud Dungatti woman working at the New England Aboriginal Corporation. We worked together and became close friends. Elva grew up on the Bellbrook Reserve near Kempsey, part of the reserve system established after frontier violence. Missionaries or welfare-oriented settlers who had opposed the violence perpetrated against Aboriginal peoples argued that Aboriginal people needed protection on these reserves. However, in many ways, these reserves resembled prisons. Under the guise of protection, Aboriginal lives were tightly controlled, while the aim of clearing Aboriginal people from their ancestral lands remained intact. From 1937, the policy of protection gave way to assimilation. Assimilation claimed to confer rights, but actually it involved erasing language and culture and separating children from their families. Elva remembered a loving childhood, yet she received no formal schooling. At the age of 11, when she still needed the care of her own parents, she was sent to Sydney to work as a domestic servant. She recalled the trauma of the train leaving Kempsey, the shame of not knowing household tasks, and eating her meals alone on the back step. Elva also recalled with humour that once she had accompanied this family to the beach. It was a mystery to her why family members would strive to make themselves browner. Elva would not see her own parents again until she was an adult. At 21, she was allowed to leave with no money or education. She headed for Redfern, where she found others also seeking freedom. Despite their griefs, Elva and her siblings showed remarkable resilience. Their young adulthoods coincided with a new policy approach. From 1973, the policy of self-determination represented a major shift in Aboriginal policy. It was intended that Aboriginal communities would make decisions about their own economic and cultural lives. At the centre of this new approach was the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Commission, ATSIC for short. ATSIC had an elected regional structure. In this way, it was positioned as a First Peoples political voice. the spirit of self-determination led to the development, among other things, of community-run institutions. During this era, Elva helped to establish the Pat Dixon Medical Centre, named in memory of her sister. Elva's sister, or sisters, Pat Dixon and Diane Roberts, became leaders in local government and early childhood education. These and other family members carried the weight of responsibility for the well-being of all in their community. But from 2004, neoliberal policies represented another seismic shift. Neoliberalism champions the free market, privatisation and competition as key to human progress. Under these policies, First Nations people were presumed to be already included. However, their inclusion was conditional. Their social disadvantage was no longer seen as having anything to do with their relationship with the colonisers. Disadvantage was said to persist because of Indigenous failings and deficiencies. Aboriginal people were constantly subjected to assessment for their capacity, and when found wanting, they would be excluded. Neoliberal policies abolished ADSIC and dismantled many Aboriginal-led institutions. Elva advocated ceaselessly for continued funding of the Pat Dixon Medical Centre in Armidale. She warned that mainstream systems would not serve the most traumatised and disadvantaged members of her community. Some people in our community will remember that about 20 years ago, we invited Elva to speak here. Elva told me afterwards that although she had attended church all her life, it was the first time people in a church had been interested in hearing her story. In the Gospel, Jesus calls people to leave behind old ways of seeing and to follow him into truth and new life. We are invited to notice what has long been rendered invisible. If we tell Australia's story as if this land were empty until we arrived, we perpetuate a falsehood. And if we treat invasion as safely confined to the past, we excuse ourselves for responsibility in the present. We mourn when we recognise how First Peoples continue to be confronted with these ever-shifting colonial barriers. This day demands that we listen to their struggles, to seek to understand our own acceptance of and participation in colonial patterns, and to resist complicity. We have a lot to learn from the resilience and leadership of First Peoples. There are ways forward. Truth-telling processes such as those in Victoria are pointing to concrete change. Responsibility begins when we choose to look more closely, see clearly, tell the truth, and walk together with respect on this land. so that we may be proud not only of what Australia has been, but also of what we can still become. For invitations that come from truth-telling and truth-listening, we give thanks.
I too benefited from colonialisation, and I was the great-grandson of Jean Grey Arthur, who came from Glasgow with my great-uncles and settled on land at Maya-Moon, west of Woburn, north of Dalwallinu, south of Pathara, and far west from Gibberding, none of which were Scottish names. I'm going to read from Mutual Obligation in Mulan, but you might be interested to know that the Mulan Aboriginal community was about 2,000 kilometres northwest of Woburn and about 700 kilometres west of Broome and 150 kilometres west of, I think I've got the west and east wrong there, 700 kilometres east of Broome and 150 kilometres west of the border between the Northern Territory and Western Australia. As Helen was speaking, I'm holding my pebble, and my pebble is rather jagged, and I've got a few marks on my hand because of the injustice that we heard about. Mutual obligation refers to a neoliberal set of welfare policy principles in which individual recipients are required to undertake actions in compensation for the benefits that they receive. Many of these activities are also aimed at reforming the capacity of individuals so that they can move from government support to self-sufficiency. Welfare is thus framed as a temporary gift extended at the discretion of governments rather than an entitlement. In a small-scale COAG shared responsibility agreement between the Mulan Indigenous community, the West Australian Government and the Commonwealth Government committed $172,260 to build a new petrol pump for the community. The Indigenous residents agreed to a raft of behavioural changes, primarily connected with hygiene. These included ensuring that household rubbish bins were emptied twice a week. Rubbish gets into them straight away and not left on the ground. Pest control happened 4 times a year, and children showered daily and washed their faces twice a day as part of the trachoma prevention program. Additionally, families agreed to send their children to school each day to pay rents on time. Labor spokesperson for Indigenous Affairs, Kim Carr, labelled the agreement coercive and patronising. Government Minister Amanda Vanstone responded that she was not sure what problem Senator Carr would have with the Mulan community getting petrol bowsers and a trachoma problem improved. The community seems pretty happy with it, she said, and it seems only Senator Carr and the ABC have a problem. Those opposing the agreement argued that the power imbalance between the government and Indigenous communities made the agreement akin to blackmail for essential services. A number of Indigenous leaders suggested the SRA, which means Shared Responsibility Agreement, echoed missionary paternalism in their attempts to micromanage Aboriginal behaviour. Larissa Berendt labelled the pact as a paternalistic and dictatorial arrangement that makes use of the word mutual ironic. When it was revealed in late 2005 that the petrol pump had still not been installed, despite the community meeting its commitment, this led to criticism of the wider federal policy. A poll taken by the Australian newspaper found that 2/3 of respondents approved of the shared responsibility agreements like the one at Mourning, and this support was evenly spread between Coalition and Labor voters. For invitations that come from truth-telling and truth-listening, we give thanks.
A reading from the prophet Isaiah. But there will be no more gloom for the land that was in anguish. In the past, God humbled the land of Zebulun, the land of Naphtali. But in future, God will bring glory to this road by the sea, this land beyond the Jordan, this Galilee of the nations. The people walking in darkness are seeing a brilliant light. Upon those who dwell in the land of deep shadows, light is shining. God, you have made the nation greater. You have brought them abundant joy. They celebrate in your presence as with the harvest celebrations. For the yoke that burdened them, the weight on their shoulders, the rod of their oppressors, you have shattered it. For a child is born to us, an heir is given us. Upon his shoulders dominion will rest. This one shall be called Wonderful Counselor, the Strength of God, Eternal Protector, Champion of Peace. This dominion and this peace will grow without end, sustained with justice and fairness now and forever. The zeal of Yahweh will accomplish it. For the proclamation of God's pathway of love and justice.
A reading from the Gospel of Matthew. When Jesus heard that John had been arrested, he went back to Galilee. He left Nazareth and settled in Capernaum, a lakeside town near the territory of Zebulun and Naphtali. In this way, the prophecy of Isaiah was fulfilled. Land of Zebulun, land of Naphtali, the way to the sea on the far side of the Jordan, Galilee of the Gentiles. The people who lived in darkness have seen a great light. On those living in the land of the shadow of death, a light has dawned. From that time on, Jesus began proclaiming the message, "Change your hearts and minds, for the kingdom of heaven is at hand." As Jesus was walking along the Sea of Galilee, he watched two brothers, Simon, who was called Peter, and Andrew, casting a net into the sea. They fished by trade. Jesus said to them, "Come, follow me, and I will make you fishers of humankind." They immediately abandoned their nets and began to follow Jesus. Jesus walked along further and caught sight of a second pair of brothers, James and John, ben Zebedee. They too were in their boats, mending their nets with their father. Jesus called them, and immediately they abandoned both boat and father to follow Jesus. Jesus travelled throughout Galilee, teaching in the synagogues, proclaiming the good news of the kingdom of heaven, and healing all kinds of diseases and sicknesses among the people. for the proclamation of God's pathway of love and justice. We give thanks.